My first question is there indeed a more valid or fruitful or functional way to depict the war and one that it isn't?
Can I start?
Sure, please.
Whose war and whose experience? Who has the right to this narrative? I mean, I find that statement kind of astounding, you know, because this is a very personal experience, and I can't even fathom there being one way or one right way to depict such a horrific and anxiety-ridden experience that everybody experiences very differently. And I think what this film does is it kind of, you know, portrays this very intimate experience, a very internal experience that the director actually relays quite successfully, I thought. That a reminder that even with war, there is everyday life as well, right? There is also normality. And I think that's what she depicted so well in this film.
Fadi?
Is it on? Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, there has been a lot of films produced in the last year, documentaries mostly about the Syrian war or the war in Syria. At the end of the day, we are watching this film tonight. The number of the public is also not small, and we're discussing it even. So the legitimacy of such images is not according to one opinion or one side. Most of the people would think, I know that from my personal experience. I'm Palestinian. I've been living in Berlin since 12 years, and actually I followed what images are Palestinian produced during wars and which would come here and which would find attention. At the other side, which Israeli images are coming here, or which images would be publicized from the mainstream media or the mainstream art scene or culture scene in Berlin. And at the end of the day, there's this urge from people in such situations, especially in war, that they want to use the images of sorrow to reach the people. But as also images, for example, from Gaza wars, I mean, the excess of sorrow images makes us numb at the end of the day. It doesn't help anymore. At one point, you'll reach a point where these images do not affect. Actually, a long time ago, I've decided not to consume such images. And then that was before the war started in Syria, and then after the war started in Syria as well. Such a decision. Facebook, news, whatever. I do not consume these images because they do not help. They do not reach. They do not make an enough emotional reactions. So just like pornography, every time the level of the image or the emotional response gets to a point, the next time you will need a higher sorrow, you need more blood, and the ceiling is open.
I think we're having a problem in contemporary cinema in general with an idea that there's only one valid narrative, and that valid narrative tends to be a middle-class director looking at poverty. And we've got to break that idea and realize that there are valid voices, no matter what somebody's class is, no matter what their background is. In every country, there are just as many voices in Paraguay as there are in the United States, as there are in Palestine, from all levels. And in fact, I think one of the big problems in Palestinian cinema is the lack of recognition of a middle class, which is another whole discussion. But it's interesting, so I reject that idea that this is somehow not a valid representation of the war, when the war is, as you were saying, is experienced by everyone very deeply and personally. But what's interesting is in conversation with the director, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, I know that she's been arguing against the idea that this is a very personal film about her family. Her argument is that no, this is what's happening in Syria in general. It happens to be her mother and her grandmother, but it could be almost anybody. not on anybody. It's important, of course, that it's also two women, a mother and a daughter. But it could be any mother and daughter in Damascus, in Aleppo, in Homs at this time.
I want to get back to like digital media and use and excessive use of images at a later point, but picking up at your point, this is one of like the things also like we face in Arab cinema. There's also like another way of or like another argument that Arab, unlike Western audience, most of the Arab audience are illiterate. That in order to reach the biggest audience, to reach a larger audience, you need to like movies in a more accessible way. It's as if doing or like constructing such a way is okay to do it in like the West or like any other place, but in the Arab world, simply because of like the makeup of the audience is not working, or seems to be like a condescending way of doing it.
That's just to me.
Everybody.
Ooh, okay,
No, but like we face it. I mean,
but I have a question about that, because when you say not working, what do you mean not working? Not working in an economic sense?
Yeah, like not reaching a wider audience.
Which wide audience as well? It's like who's making the images, for what reason, and which audience does people want to reach, and for what reason again?
Let's elaborate on that.
If I can maybe, this might be addressing that point in a way. And there's a new Egyptian film that came out 2 months ago called Nawara. It's very much made in a typical Egyptian populist melodramatic style, and yet its message is very much that the cronies of Hosni Mubarak's regime are still in power. So it has a very political message at the same time that it's done in an almost simplistic way and in a very populist way. In terms of acting, in terms of lighting, you look at it and you recognize it instantly for what it is, and yet there's something much deeper underneath than the general popular cinema in Egypt would normally give. And I like the film because of that, and I think what you're saying is, why do we need to, in a sense, talk down to an audience by making it in that style? Because we think that's going to make it accessible for them.
Exactly.
My argument actually is that that I think we do that in every country. I don't think that it's necessarily something in the Arab world that we're doing. I think that the majority of American films are geared towards a very dumb, I don't want to say dumb public, but or I do kind of. But yeah, I know. But for a public who aren't looking at cinema as a way of anything other than entertainment, maybe that's a better way, more diplomatic way of putting it. And I'm not sure that there's a problem with that. I'm not sure there's a problem in adapting yourself when you have a message that you want to get out to a broader audience. Does that make sense?
Yes, but
I mean, you can argue against it.
yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts.
No, I wouldn't argue against it, actually, because at one point I got a feeling which fits more to art scene than cinema, that there's a lot of filmmakers or artists in the Arabic world would make stuff that is more accessible to European middle class public than
easy now.
No, I mean it's a fact, because there's a lot of I'm Palestinian in Palestine. I know a lot of artists who locally are not known at all. Sure. It's like and that's the question: which audience do you want to reach and why? Is it because of fame? Is it because do you want an idea to be abroad? Is it because you want to be able to make better films and more films and get funded and go to festivals and get prizes? I mean, that's a legitimate question. And Nawara is a very good example, because you wouldn't see Nawara here or any other international festival.
But what about making film for the sake of making a film, right? I mean, speaking from the artist perspective, I think it's very paralyzing, actually, as a creative person, to consider the very specific audience that you might be reaching. And I think most people who are creating films or anything artistic for that matter hope to reach someone, but that someone might not necessarily be defined. And I think the argument shouldn't be whether or not a film like this is valid, but the argument should be, why is a film like this valid, actually? Like, why is it important to have this in contrast to maybe kind of the mass kind of popular films films that reach the masses, right? That these kinds of films are very important in juxtaposition to those, because they serve a very different function. They reach a very different people, and I wouldn't kind of limit it by saying they only reach a Western white middle class. Because people are transforming the ways that they digest images, especially when we're starting to talk about the digital age and access to material online. I think people's perceptions of these kinds of works are starting to change. People's taste in these kinds of works are starting to change. And it may not reach a mass audience, but it might reach someone. And ultimately, as a creative person, that's what you hope to achieve.
I would just... you're all gonna hate me, I know, but I'm just still playing the devil's advocate. No, like honestly, because like this is the kind of stuff that we like hear all the time in the Arab world. But like coming back to that point, like speaking of like whether like that for some it's not just about reaching a bigger audience, that a movie about a conflict should have a different function, that should have a message. Simply because, you know, like you're not, because, you know, like there is, for example, Abu Nadara, the like the collective, you know, like the activist group who, you know, like creates a work that they call like an act of activism. And so their work is like to mobilize. And this is how many see that, how this is like this, how movies about conflict should be, you know, like to serve a certain function.
Speaking to a number of filmmakers who tell me that's the most paralyzing thing of all, actually, is the idea that they're making a film for a political reason, that they're making a film to get somebody else's message across, or even their own message, but that it has to be couched in a particularly political way, when what they want to do is they're making their film rather than making a statement. Given that all film is political, all of that, we just accept that, and that, yes, it's going to have some kind of statement, but to force a filmmaker or any artist to create with a particular goal other than their own creative process, I think is dangerous.
Of course, I wasn't saying that artists are doing that for that reason, or it is illegitimate to do that as the same way. I mean, but the question is, sometimes other things would have a greater effect on that. The art market, for example. I mean, there's a lot of factors which play a big role in such a thing. I mean, if a filmmaker wants to make a film about a very personal issue, why not? But also at the same time here, let's say a good love story from Sudan, which functions very good. How interesting is it for European public? I mean, it's like, okay, it's another love story from Sudan. The film functions very good. It might be excellent, but no one cares here. But another way, a film that's not very good from Sudan as well, talking about a very hot political issue, people would screen it and show it, and that is also a kind of pushing people to make specific, or pushing artists or filmmakers to make specific things, because to reach audience is also limited to curators, people working in the media, mass media, and every decision in that area affects a filmmaker or an artist somewhere in the world. I mean, why do you choose a film to show it in Berlin, and why not is a big question.
And isn't that what like festivals expect or want or demand?
Absolutely, they demand it. They're looking for films that that they think have a particular message. That they're not going to program comedies, or almost rare, never. And that's, pardon?
Or genre movies.
Yeah, I think more and more festivals are actually looking at various genres. I have an issue with the whole concept of genre because I think every film is a genre, so it's a strange category for me. But that's a general problem with the festival landscape in general, is that people don't realize that we need diversity in our films, and that we can love COMA and we can also really like, Bridesmaids or something. But hopefully we're all people with multifaceted tastes, and to deny all of us that, I think, is a problem that festivals should be addressing.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I often kind of think about this dilemma that I find quite conflicting, this idea that the European festivals have this responsibility to show diversity, which then kind of puts the responsibility on the artist again to relay this political story, to like represent their country or whatever, and it then kind of creates that paradox between the artist and the festival of can the artists have an authentic voice, can they make a valid film, whatever that may be.
Have you ever felt that pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's very valid, the points that you brought up about the difficulty in funding, and that you have to kind of fit within these art markets and these structures to make films. But luckily, there's also alternatives. And luckily, there's people who make films outside of those systems, but it's increasingly becoming difficult. And then, to gain your validity as an artist, you have to fit within those systems. So it's really this kind of back and forth dilemma. And I really do wonder, is it the responsibility of festivals to really kind of, pick a film from each region and show this diversity? And then what pressure does that put on artists to create these very specific kind of films and to fit this specific mold?
It's a subject that interests me particularly now, especially with regard to the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa, because for too long festivals have thought, well, I have one Arab language film in my program and that's okay. I've dealt with the region. You can have 5 films from Latin America, or 6 or more. And Leila Bouzi, the Tunisian director of the terrific film As I Open My Eyes, we had a conversation precisely about that you have one Arab language film and they think that khalas, it's done. But no, why are we limiting any region to one particular voice, which indeed does force the filmmaker to think, I have to therefore represent 40 million people.
Like picking down just that very small point, again, out of curiosity, what do you think the sudden interest in Arab movies?
Now, the refugee crisis.
Okay, good point.
Everybody wants, you've got to hang, everybody wants to be able to hang their coat on a particular hook, and that's the one now, unfortunately, because everything is fashion.
Yes.
I want to return to the point of like the excessive use of images that we were just like mentioning about earlier. Like certainly how we consume news, how we regard the war has like vastly differed. I don't know, like 15 years ago. Now, watching the first Gulf War through TV was quite an experience, was quite something. Now it's as if, because of like the excess of images that like is available everywhere, not just through TV but online media, it's as if like the image has lost its entity, that it has reached a point where it doesn't have any power anymore. It's definitely applicable to the situation in Palestine. I still remember like the Third Gaza War, when we reach a point where we know that the Gaza is bombed and people like dying, and it's like as if people reach a point where we've seen this before, we don't care.
Exactly. It's odd enough. I remember at the day where in one day the images of the dead Alan Kurdi on the beach. Over Twitter, I came to a very small article somewhere. I couldn't find it anymore. I looked at it, and I think it was a student. It was asking a very basic question. It's like, when was the last time anybody have seen a picture or an image of a dead European white body. I read it, and then it went over, and then in the days I was like, I don't remember. I don't recall seeing an image of a European dead body. I went to Facebook again. I've looked online. I couldn't find any. And on the other hand, you'll have a flood of images of dead refugees, the war in Syria, wars in other places. And I've been asking myself since then, how does this thing happen? Is it a big conspiracy? No, it's not. But there's somebody who's deciding on that. Somewhere is like these images are not reaching the public. Is it that nobody is making these images now in the Paris attacks? Nobody have done any images at all? Could be. Did anybody make images and then these images were censored afterward on social media? Could be. Is it the news, the media who decided to, Reuters or the agencies who decided not to distribute these images? Could be. I don't know, but I don't recall seeing any image like that. And it's pretty awkward if you get always the whole time these images are overall in social media. They'll get distributed over the news agencies, and that is that makes me, the question is like how it seems like it doesn't matter anymore. Because we have seen it. Yeah.
Your thoughts?
I'm more interested in Heba's thoughts. As the
Well, I mean, I think it's also very unsettling that now we kind of watch film, and it's somehow directly, especially Arab film, and it's directly correlated to the media image, that we're so bombarded with the media image that we now no longer know how to process images without keeping the media image in mind. And that is reinforced in the types of films that are being made and in the types of films that particularly European festivals are choosing. It's those kind of exoticized, politicized narratives. But that then speaks very powerfully about these images that we saw today. And I think one could argue that these kinds of films now have become even more powerful in juxtaposition to the kind of image that we're seeing on a daily basis. And it's a sort of reminder, you know, it's something that we know is there. We know that there are these internal struggles, these personal struggles, and yet we don't see them, right? Because we see this exoticized, inhuman image, right? You know, the dead bodies, the mass killings, and perhaps there's something to be said about, you know, making these kind of quieter films that are in complete juxtaposition to the media image. I'm not sure, but for me, somehow, they've become more powerful.
No, I think we would all agree that we need to have both. I mean, with a lot of the media images, we need them as a record of what's been happening. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the extraordinary things about YouTube throughout the war and the conflicts that are happening now, is just how much footage is out there, which is overwhelming. There's no way that we can consume all of that much. And as you said, we become completely numb to it after a while. You can't cope with it, and so you stop looking. But thank goodness it's there, because ultimately we need these recorded images of as a record of what's been happening. At the same time as we need to also have a more human emotion, which is what you're saying, and a more direct involvement with people rather than people who are divorced from personalities. That's always the problem, I think, with the media, with news media, of footage, for example, whenever there's a bomb and people have been killed, you generally, in Western media, hear and see a woman screaming hysterically. Generally, they never subtitle it. Nobody knows what she's saying because they don't speak Arabic. So it becomes the standard screaming Arab woman who's just hysterical. And that it contributes to the dehumanization of the whole process. Yet we're consuming that all the time. So we need, indeed, these images and these films that give people personalities, that give people names. So often we don't have names connected to these images. Names are important. Names mean that somebody has an individuality. when we rob people of their names, we take away their lives.
They become numbers, statistics.
So, like, correct me if I'm wrong, are you saying that, like, these images would make more sense or, like, would be more impactful when put in the context of a story? Because, like, but let me cut you off for a second. Because, like, those images that you were saying, whether in YouTube or not, you know, like, gradually, especially in repressive regimes like ours, Egypt, have often been manipulated. That, like, an image doesn't have any meaning anymore. It can be interpreted in so many different ways. The Maspero massacre, for instance, in, like, where 28 Egyptian Christians were murdered by the army, has, you know, like, over, like, the past, like, 3 years have been, like, widely analyzed in different ways. Now, like, people are saying, you know, like, it was a Muslim Brotherhood. You know, like, the fact that you're actually, like, seeing a tank crushing people, people are now, like, finding different interpretations to it, and they're questioning their validity. Again, within this context, within this, you know, like, regimes and media and so many different factors, what would an image, a sole image, would it have any sense? Would it make any sense?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say that images have no meaning. I think actually quite the opposite. I mean, this idea that it's so easy to manipulate images and in fact influence people on such a mass scale is proof that they're incredibly meaningful, right? Whether they're real or not.
That's my question. Real truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think an image can be equally powerful even if it's not truthful. And there is a truth in a non-truthful image, isn't there? I mean, I really hate to bring this up, but I have to, which is the latest image by Ai Weiwei and the kind of, you know, tidal wave that it caused in dealing with this very what has now become an iconic image of a child, a dead child on the beach, right? And that kind of goes to show actually how much power and how much emotion these kinds of images can instill in people.
And here we come to the power of cinema. I mean, the thing is with such images, they're very, in the moment, it's within seconds, even if they have emotional impact, it will fade away. But to spend 2 hours with a family, hearing their voices, knowing about their fears, and it's becoming to know the people as if you know them personally, it would definitely have a longer impact than even an iconic image if it gets used very often. It's like the brain would react to new things. I mean, if you see it, if you see an iconic image once, and if there's posters in the whole street, after the 100th poster, you won't notice it anymore. It will fade into the surrounding. And that's why I find such films which gets really near to the people and get to know them and take time to do that as well are much powerful.
I'm going to jump back to your question about do these images need therefore to be put into a narrative? And I think that's a very tricky, very dangerous territory that has been done. And I think it was 2 years ago or last year, you might remember the name of the film, and I can't even remember the filmmaker. A European filmmaker went trawling through YouTube and gathered hundreds of hours of YouTube videos of the various conflicts from the beginning of the Arab Spring to now and all of the wars. And he rearranged them into a single narrative as if it was one conflict. From Iraq to Tunisia, it was as if it was all, in Syria, it was as if it was all one story. And I was furious at this because doing that robs them of their meaning. Because they're not, everyone is different. And so it's dangerous when we take these films out of context and put them into our own constructed narrative. At the same time, Osama Mohammed, who also used YouTube video in the beginning of his film, did a brilliant job of it and made it incredibly powerful. So it depends, as usual, on the artist.
One final question. I'm not sure if you can have an answer to that or not before we open the room for discussion. What do you think is the role of spectator in all of this? is it by being aware of like these images? Is it enough? Are we like supposed to be acting? Are we supposed to be like have empathy? Being like, should we not?
Isn't that what got Meryl Streep in trouble last night by saying we're all
That was
Africans?
so much fun. That's my highlight of the Berlinale so far.
All Africans.
It's a difficult question. I mean, everybody talks about awareness, and at the end of the day, sometimes awareness is not more than pressing a like button at Facebook. I mean, it depends how much the people want to react, and even if they do want to do anything about it. I mean, but at the end of the day, we should definitely make sure that such films and such content doesn't become pure entertainment and only consumption for intellectuality, so that these works would still always need a kind of content discussions. Maybe would that lead to something?
Would you agree, Heba?
I mean, I have a hard time with this idea of people's roles being premeditated, right? In the same way that we just said, or that I just said, that I don't think it should be the responsibility on the artist or the filmmaker to, instigate or mobilize people, right? In the same way that the spectator takes from it what they want and what they need and what they feel like taking. I think the pressures, or not the pressure, but like the it's constructs like this where we're having this discussion. This is where I have kind of more expectation of, okay, let's have a conversation about this, right? And this is where maybe, this idea of enlightening people or people, consuming in a way that might help, move them in a way. But I really am uncomfortable with putting the responsibility on either the film or the artist or the spectator in the same way.
I suppose I have no expectations of utopian expectations that spectators are going to suddenly become activists. Some will, some won't. It's. So I don't know that that's the function.
It shouldn't be.
No, I don't think it should be a concern. I don't think it should matter.
But it's really interesting because it's a really big topic right now. I mean, I can't tell you the number of events that I'm being invited to talk about the role of human rights in art, like can art save the world? And I find this really peculiar, right? Because, I mean...
No, but it's true. Like we cannot, and I'm not playing the devil's advocate, I'm just saying my opinion, but I really think that the idea of like creating an art that an art can indeed save the world is already bullshit. Because like it just seems exceedingly far-fetched.
Well, I mean, it's a fruitful conversation to have. I mean, I think absolutely there is a place for art and film to move people, to address important topics, to start that discussion. Again, it's really about having that conversation, and it's worthwhile talking about. But then again, it's like putting that entire load and responsibility on, this field or this genre to somehow get us out of the mess that we're in is also absurd. So I mean, there's kind of limits in which we can talk about these things.
Let's open the room for discussion. Questions?
It's a pity that Sara is not here to us to hear a little bit of the struggles and the joys of to do this film. And as us only women in this film, I wonder if you guys could comment about the actually role of the Arabian woman with the contradictions and with the expectations. For example, in the film, when she talk about this house in the country and not able to even talk to the neighbor because of the veil, and was my kingdom, and with this situation now here in Germany, within Cologne. So all these things, how you guys would comment on the role of the woman?
I'm very disappointed that the two issues are Cologne and the veil. Really, I mean, there's so much more that we can talk about of the role of women. I mean, actually, that's a very important point, and that was something I was thinking about the entire time when I was watching it, right? Is that these are, again, intimate narratives of women who are facing a struggle that are not humanized in the media. We don't usually see the narrative of the woman in the media. But to kind of then limit it, to kind of narrow it down into the issue of the veil and harassment is you know, I'm sorry, I don't mean to pick on you, but that really irks me so badly as a woman who comes from the region, and the incredible powerful stories that come from women in the region. And I really you know, I'm very happy to see a film like this, and it touched me so deeply that Sara showed this particular position and particular perspective of I mean, I don't know that it's a cry for help. It's a relaying an experience, you know, in the same way that, you know, the media is relaying an experience. I mean, again, it's kind of putting this woman in this submissive position that I really don't agree with.
I agree with your opinion very much about this context of a artistic production that is very, you know, in one way a very sad film, but in one way a very brilliant, you know, cinematic experience. And I think it's important to have that, and I find that
absolutely.
is now time.
And I think absolutely, and I think what's sad is that we contextualize it, and especially here in Germany, we contextualize it within these very specific narratives that are appearing in the media, right? So I think it's also very important to actually take a stance and say, those aren't the stories that I'm going to talk about, right? There are other stories to be told about women in the region, women worldwide. And there are very many, even though you're suggesting that this film is a cry for help, there are very many things that are quite powerful about this film.
First question, why or what was the point regarding on them this film was chosen to be shown here first?
I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question.
Sorry?
This is a question I cannot. Anybody of the programmers would like to answer, because this is a movie we completely believed in. It represents a different picture of the Syrian conflict. We thought it's a very powerful movie, but you know, like, I really don't think that we have to justify ourselves.
Okay.
That's the first question. Second question.
Okay. Second question. You believe that you are offering something else or something new for the public here?
Who are we?
The people who are showing this, or the people who are waiting this, because I've heard this is what we are waiting for, and this is we are missing to see. Right now, 10 minutes
I think
ago,
the audience are the ones who could answer that. I cannot answer that.
No, you were saying, you and your colleagues, that exactly this is what we wanted to see. Exactly this is what we wanted to
No, absolutely not. This is simply, it's not like as if, like, hey, like, we wanted to address this issue, or like we wanted to, you know, like, we want to have, you know, like, as if we had a certain theme or something, or a certain concept that we wanted to choose a movie to like to fulfill. Absolutely not. This is just like any selection committee in any festival in the world, in any program. We saw the movie, we liked it, we screened it. Nothing beyond that.
I'm more interested in knowing what it is you don't like about the film, because obviously you've got a problem with the idea of it being, or what it's saying, so I'm curious to know why.
I don't have any problem. I respect the film. I see a lot of effort behind the film, and it's fine. I'm fine with the film. The idea that we are we are defining what the public is waiting to see.
We never claimed
and
that.
It is through a recipe what is still missing here and what we would like to see. And forgetting the important point that this film is or should be shown somewhere else.
I cannot answer
But wait,
other
how
people.
come you say that? Why do you say that? I don't understand the point of, like, why do you say it should be shown somewhere else?
And what other places, for instance?
No, I'm not planning yet the next screening. Just the idea, because we have heard from you guys that this fits us. This is what we wanted to see, and this is fine.
We didn't say that. As I
All
said,
right. Okay.
we never claimed that, and I think it would be very condescending for anybody, any programmer, any critic to say that. Absolutely not.
All right. Okay.
Thank you for your question.
It's the whole idea of
Any questions?
I don't really know how to articulate this, but I want to respond to what just happened. Maybe it's the Western part of the audience is a bit overwhelmed by this film, because they don't expect to see anything like this. I mean, I have a friend from Lebanon, and she told me exactly how she lived through the war and everything, and I thought this was really depicting my friend's life, and I could completely relate to this film, and I'm very grateful for this film. But I don't know if a majority of the Western spectators are maybe overwhelmed by this and don't know what to do with it. And my question would be, how do we connect voices like this to people who are overwhelmed by this? How do we connect them?
I'm not really following. Are you following?
I mean, so many people left this conversation. I don't know why.
I think that goes back to the discussion we had earlier of how do you gear a film to a particular audience, and do you adapt a style hoping that it's going to reach a broader public. And I don't like the idea of as we were saying, sort of dictating to a filmmaker how to make their film. I think everybody has to make it their own way. The question is, how do you attract an audience to something that maybe a general public isn't going to be interested in seeing? And that for me is the key. And this isn't a film for a general audience. And I think forcing a general audience to come to watch it is not a good idea, because it just simply distances them further from both this kind of cinema and from the conflict itself, I think. I don't know that this is a film that's necessarily going to connect with everybody. And in a way, that's okay.
But my question is rather, how do we get more voices like this, you know? And how do we get it to the general public? Like the different voices like this. I mean, this film for me depicts what war does with people.
Yeah. I think the answer to that probably is we need to make the idea of making cinema more of a possibility for everyone. And in this digital age, it is much more accessible. It is much easier for people to pick up a camera. I'm not saying everybody should pick up a camera. I'm always saying that, you know, we have a lot of really crappy movies out there. And I wish a lot of people would just put their cameras down, bury them, give them away to people who actually could do something proper with it. But I think that I would love, this sounds, I hope this doesn't sound sort of very kind of Western charity organization thing. I'd love cameras to be distributed in refugee camps. You know, there are so many stories that need to be told, and that people can be inspired to tell and to show. That's the sort. I think that would be a really good idea.
Well, I mean, I
sorry,
think that I.
to cut you
sorry.
in, don't you also like think that part of the process is perhaps like ways of funding should be changed as well?
The ways of what?
Of funding.
How long do you want to speak for?
Definitely, but how? I mean, who would know?
Who's funding? I mean,
who's
this is very important. I mean, let's have this conversation,
Let's have
right?
this conversation.
This is very important because I mean, I want to respond to something that you said, which was that you feel very overwhelmed by this film, and I think that's a very positive thing. You should feel overwhelmed by this film because none of us can purport to say we know what it feels like to be in a war if we've never experienced being in a war, right? And so as a spectator, when you're watching this film, I mean, for me, it was a very difficult film to watch. I could never imagine being in that situation. And as a result, you know, I feel like it's important for me to watch and to listen and to try to understand without having to feel like I need to relate to it, because I'm never going to relate to it because I haven't experienced that. Having said that, these voices are important, and yes, we do need to promote them. But if we're going to start talking about funding structures, this is a really important conversation because it's a very problematic structure. When you have a predominantly European or Western funding structures that are funding people in refugee camps or in war zones, ultimately they're going to create stories for a Western audience, and that's incredibly problematic. And that's something that at all costs we need to try to avoid. And I'm not saying that I have the solution for that. I don't know what it is. And for me as an artist from the region, I try to avoid those funding structures so that I can kind of keep myself open. But it's not always easy. And sometimes you do have to depend on them.
Yeah, and to air a dirty little secret is a lot of these European film funds actually tell filmmakers how to change their script. And so you'll get people who are making a film in Lebanon who submit their film to a film fund, and then somebody who's never been to Lebanon says, well, you know, you really should change that female character because she should be more like this. And you're thinking, excuse me? How dare you? Yeah. And that happens all the time, unfortunately.
And following up on that, I'm gonna ask a very politically incorrect question that you can answer or not. But don't you also think that sometimes the Arab funds implements these pressures or dictates what films cannot be?
Every funding does. I mean, there's nobody just giving money for nothing. I mean, everybody has an agenda, and there's no one who doesn't have that agenda. Even if we think that the agenda is good, it doesn't make this agenda disappear. And that's how things work. Films cost money, and there's no way to make films without this money.
But having said that, I noticed that Sara produced this film. Right, and that's also really important to note, because then that means she ultimately probably, made the film that she wanted to make, and that's something we should really embrace and celebrate.
And that's another form of power.
Crowdfunding is also an answer to that.
Jay, you want to comment?
I think it's been answered. That every fund has an agenda.
More questions? Any more questions? Shall we wrap this thing up? Thank you very, very, very much for coming and for staying behind and for your great questions. Follow our schedule the next few days. Tomorrow we have Philippe Grandieus's movie, Marginal Me, and I'm totally pronouncing it wrong. And on Sunday, we have a double bill of the Nikuti short, May We Sleep Soundly, and Andrei Zulawski's first movie in 15 years, Cosmos. So spread the word, and we hope to see you in the next few days. Thank you very much.